Hello, I'm Dr Karl. I'm the Director of the Museum of Australian Democracy, and I'd like to welcome you all to this magnificent King's Hall here at Old Parliament House for a COVID-safe, in-person, how unique is that, launch of Behind the Lines 2020. And what a year it has been, although probably not one we'd like to dwell on, except perhaps through the eyes of our brilliant political cartoonists. Shortly, we'll be announcing the Political Cartoonist of the Year. And before that, there'll be a conversation with Karl Kruszelnicki, exploring some of the science underpinning the year that was. And how wonderful was it to see a return to experts and scientists for much of our commentary. But to start proceedings, I'd like to invite Wally Bell to welcome us to country. Wally is a Ngunnawal man, a traditional custodian, who actively participates in Ngunnawal Aboriginal cultural heritage management and land management for the area that lies within his ancestral boundary. Wally, welcome.
Thank you very much. I want you to learn one thing today, and that's just how to say hello. I'm going to say that word to you, and if you can say it back to me, that'd be great. Yuma. Thank you. So now you can speak one word at least in Ngunnawal. I'm, as has been said, I'm a Ngunnawal man. I've grown up on this country all my life. I actually grew up in a little place called Jerawa. And of course you all know what that place is, don't you? Yeah. No, most people don't. It's a small village. And it's on the railway line between Yass and Gunning. It's there that I learned about being an Aboriginal person on country. Of course, it starts at a young age. I was about 5 or 6 when my father took me out on country and explained what country is and our connection to the land itself. Ngunnawal country is a fairly sizable place, I suppose. It's something like 17,000 square kilometres. The ACT itself actually sits inside our ancestral boundary. So I work with a lot of bureaucracy, of course, in cultural heritage management works that I do. That can be pretty tiresome at times, I can tell you, but it's part of the process these days. Now, with our culture then, it's going to be quite different to the rest of the Aboriginal people of Australia. Now, when you look at the fact that there's well over 400 different tribal groups right across Australia. And then when you look at the fact that we get our culture and our belief systems from the land that we live on. Okay, so our cultural practice here in Ngunnawal country is going to be quite different. You know, different environments, different practices. If you look at Central Australia, for instance, you can understand then that you're going to have different vegetation patterns and things like that. Even as close as, down on the coast with the Yuin people, cultural practice is quite different again. So, with that in mind, as Aboriginal people then, my people, the Ngunnawal, have different clan groups. And just so that we can live in harmony, we have what we call communal law. That's LAW law. But overarching all that, right across Australia, with all tribal groups, we have what we call traditional customary law. That's LORE. Now that law tells us as Aboriginal people what we have to do while we're on country. There's many laws and they're all quite different. As I've already stated, culture comes from the country. So that law tells us all about what we have to do while on country. But one of the things that happens right across all that under our law is what I'm doing for you guys today, which is a welcome to country. Now, a lot of people don't have a clear idea what a welcome to country is. Now, I sort of try to explain that in that in doing the work in the country, I'm not only going to welcome you onto country, but I'm also, under our law, going to offer up a protection for you while you're on country, because that is part of the process. That protection comes in two forms. The first part is a physical protection. So we're going to call upon our spirit of the land to look after you as you're walking around on country. So that's the physical part of that protection. But another important part of that is the spiritual protection. So we're going to call upon our ancestral spirits to look after you in a spiritual sense, right? Because everybody here has got their own personal aura. Now, you know at times that you can either feel sick or sad or something on the downside. And that's because under our belief systems, we believe that there is bad spirit out there, bad energy, bad stuff that we don't want in country. Now, unknown to you, because you can't see it or feel it, that stuff actually latches on to your aura and creates that bad feelings that you have. So we ask our ancestral spirits to remove that stuff from country, because we don't want it to affect you as a person, but most importantly, we also don't want it to affect the land that you're on, because we need a clean, productive country for basic survival. Now, my way of doing that under my clan group, who are the art people, is I make a bit of noise and I call for those spirits to come and join me as I welcome you onto country and give up a protection for you while you're here. I do that using my trusty old clap sticks. You have to give me a second, I've got to find the right spot, otherwise the spirits won't hear me. Ooh, good. Very good. Alrighty. Because I do so much cultural heritage management works, I'm out in country the whole time, and being an honourable man, I also have a strong connection with my country. I can feel those spirits are now with us, pretty strong here, most probably because we're in a place, where Parliament House now sits. New Parliament House. Used to be our major meeting and ceremonial place. So I reckon it's an idea the Feds stole from us. Because we used to invite all the neighbouring tribal groups in here as well, so. And it's a really strong spiritual connection we've got here. Hopefully you can feel that presence as well. It'd be really good if you can, because it'll give you a good, strong connection with this land as you're walking around on it. The spirits then ask you to do two things while you're on country. First one, really important one, is to respect this place that you're in. You have to look after it and care for it while you're here, as we have done for thousands of years. Second thing they want you to do is to also respect and be kind and courteous to other people that you meet while you're in country. So if you do these two things for us, the spirits will then harmonise with your stay on Ngunnawal country. So may the spirits be with you today, tomorrow, and for always. Whew. It's a really strong presence. I'll close with some words in language. Dalawa nunna, dalawa nunuwal. Yangu, Nalawari, Dunamayan, Narraganawali, Yumalundi. This land is Ngunnawal land. We come together today to sit and talk. Welcome. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Wally, for that extraordinary, powerful and very insightful and moving welcome. And Wally will be having to leave a little bit early because he has to go to another welcome to country. So I'll thank you in advance for that extraordinary welcome. Contemporary political cartoons are part of Australia's rich tradition of free speech and free expression, the values that are the cornerstone of our democracy. But how to capture 2020, a year of bushfires, smoke, hail and plague, plus politics as normal or abnormal, you can choose. What could we add that would make sense of this unusual year? Well, that's the joy of political cartoons. At their best, they illuminate issues, events, in a distinct and often very direct way, told with originality and creativity. They provide comment and insight and provoke a response. They make us laugh, cry, groan, and more. Behind the Lines 2020, A Dog's Breakfast does all that. Under the curatorial leadership of Holly Williams, it captures this extraordinary, strange and chaotic year by bringing together 104 cartoons from 36 cartoonists, including digital artists for the first time. And this year we introduce a new section focusing on a significant issue, that's how it's been treated over time. For 2020, it's Closing the Gap. And we're grateful to Amy Maguire, a Darumbal and South Sea Islander journalist who has curated this specifically for us. To help us unpack some of the science behind this crazy year, we have a special guest, Dr Karl Kruszelnicki, Julius Sumner Miller Fellow at Sydney University, who will be in conversation with MoAD's Edwina Jand, whose background as an archaeologist underpins her passion for understanding science and human behaviour. Dr Karl is well known to all of us and uniquely able to make science accessible. And in a year where weather, fires and coronavirus shaped much of the conversation, who knew we'd be experts in viral spread, vaccines and toilet paper? Dr Karl is the perfect person to unpack that for us. Can you welcome Edwina and Dr Karl to the stage?
Thank you very much, Daryl. And as Dr Karl and I settle into our chairs and looking forward to this conversation, I just want to make sure that the audience realises that they too can be part of this conversation. So please think up some of those questions, those burning issues that have really jumped to the fore this year in what has been an amazingly crazy year, because Dr Karl's going to bring his scientist lens to help us unpack all of that. So we have 2 microphones on the side, so please feel free to jump up when you're ready. So, Dr Karl, thank you so much for joining us today, and like cartoonists, bringing your lens to help us unpack what's been a crazy year. And the theme of the exhibition, 2020, A Dog's Breakfast, made me think, well, what exactly is a dog's breakfast? Where did that expression come from?
It's more common in the British Commonwealth type countries than the United States type countries. It goes back to the late 1800s, and it's got various meanings depending on where you are in the world. Meaning, overall, it means a real mess, completely horrible or disgusting, but definitely not something well organised. And there's a few different origins. One is that, well, you're cooking something for breakfast and blow me down, you put the cereal in the toaster for too long and added too much milk on top of the toast. Man, it was a mess. So you just gave it to the dog. It was a mess. It was a dog's breakfast. That's number one. Number two was another, it sort of relates to having too much fun the night before, and people were drinking and vomiting in the backyard. And when you wake up in the morning, what is the dog doing but eating up the vomit? A dog's breakfast. Option number three, the dog has been eating too much grass, or it's been deliberately eating grass so as to get rid of something bad in its gut, like cats do, and it vomits up, and that's a dog's breakfast. But basically it means a real mess. And I think that you can pretty well say that 2020 was unprecedented and a bit of a mess. And it's a bit of a coincidence that it happened, you got these three events that happened 102 years apart. So in 1816, you had the year without a summer, where Mount Toba in Indonesia exploded and turned into Lake Toba and threw 100 cubic kilometres of dust into the air and cooled the whole world down by a few centigrade degrees and led to famines in Europe and also to Frankenstein.
Right.
Because what happened in Frankenstein...
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Mary Shelley. So what happened was that holed up in the Villa Diodata on the banks of Lake Geneva in Switzerland were Lord Byron, who, as you know, was mad, bad and dangerous, and his girlfriend, who was the sister of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley and underage, and Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, who actually was Mary Wollstonecraft, but she married Shelley after Percy Shelley, who was also there, person number 4. His wife had jumped off the Waterloo Bridge, or had she been pushed, we don't know. And keeping these, shall we say, artistic characters, which you political cartoonists would know about, keeping these artistic characters in line was Dr Polidori, keeping them supplied with all sorts of drugs. And under the influence of drugs, and because they were trapped indoors by the very bad weather, she decided to write this story, which turned out into Frankenstein. So a volcano erupting in 1816 gave us Frankenstein. Roll forward 102 years, you've then got the influenza pandemic. Roll forward another 102 years, and then you've got this one today, the coronavirus pandemic. Now, that's a very small sample size, 2 lots of 102 years, so I wouldn't give any scientific credibility to anything I said.
Well, it certainly sounds like challenging times have been with us, and out of challenging times have had, great scientific discoveries, but also artistic ones. But I guess one of my next questions, as I wait for others to join our conversation, is that can any of these things explain why humans feel the need to hoard toilet paper?
Hoarding toilet paper. Well, firstly, the toilet paper is really bulky, so if it starts to vanish off the shelves, you notice it really quickly, like there's this entire aisle of it. Secondly, there's probably related to that the desire for some sort of control in a situation that you have no control over. And so at least if you buy toilet paper, you're doing some sort of token. Thirdly, there's the old hoarding, which is kind of good. Like, do you have, here's a question without notice, do you have emergency chocolate at home?
Of course.
Yeah, right. So you got the chocolate, and then you got the extra chocolate that they won't find, and then you got the emergency chocolate just in case they find the hidden chocolate, right? So on one hand, it's good to stockpile stuff, but on the other hand, if you do it too much, you then run into hoarding behaviour. And I think that people were so upset by this event, of which they had no control, that people who had a natural stockpiling thing went a little bit over. Like I went into, we've got to get some chocolate and some sorbeline. Sorboline's the stuff I wash with instead of soap. So different people did in different ways. So that kind of explains why people went off in a way to try and get control. And it was a serious threat. At the beginning of the year, this year, 2020, when I looked at the figures and the death rates, I said, if we do nothing, within a year, 1% of the Australian population will be dead. That's 250,000 Australians. And we did a lot. And so we've kept that number way, way down. By the way, in Taiwan did a lot better. They've got the same population as Australia. They had 7 dead. Not 700, 7, because the World Health Organization, after the 2003 SARS and 2009 H1N1, said every country in the world should set up a permanently run pandemic centre. And you're thinking, gee, that's a bit expensive, but every airport you fly in and out of, in the days when you used to fly in and out of airports, every airport has got a fire crew who are paid to be there and do nothing. Basically, they practice and nothing happens. And they do it year after year and nothing happens. And maybe once every 10 years they might get called out. And so most of the countries in the world did not set up a pandemic unit. Taiwan did. And as soon as the pandemic hit, they had people and apparatus. So the apparatus, they'd buy the new stuff and it'd go out of date and they'd throw it away and get new and new. So they had everything. There was no buying of it. They had everything. And secondly, they had people who had been through simulations and they knew what to do. And bang, they just rolled into action. 7 dead in the whole country. And that could have been the same in Australia. So we've done well.
So what you're saying is that there's opportunities to learn from history, which in a museum, we love the idea of
opportunity to learn from history. Gee, I've never heard that concept before. But you're an archaeologist, so
That's right.
You must see so much of this stuff.
So we had a really interesting conversation before as an ex-archaeologist. I'm used to analysing the remains of the past, and we have a section in the exhibition called Buried Bones, which is one that I've really liked the idea of, and also because I am the mum of a COVID puppy, and I'm sure I'm not the only one to admit that.
The mother of a COVID
puppy. So I also have a dog's breakfast in my backyard right now.
So this puppy was born in the COVID
That's right.
year.
In the COVID year. And the COVID puppy is something that's also a bit of a theme in our exhibition. But back to Buried Bones. Can you tell us what we can learn from the bones of the past, literally analysing them? Because there are some obvious connections to what we can learn about where we are right now and how people react in times of crisis.
Well, we can learn a lot from bones from the past. So the oldest one we have is a well-documented case of cancer in a dinosaur about 100 million years ago, a sort of osteosarcoma. And then we see from the bones of people in recent times and going back thousands and then tens and thousands of years, from their bones we get a very good indication of their physical health. And of course your bones remodel themselves. So if you, for example, pump iron, your bones change shape. So we can see from the bones what happens with people. I'll just do a little tiny diversion now. Sorry, I've got a very short attention span. Spontaneous human combustion. 200 cases in 4 centuries. Completely different what happens to the bones as compared to a normal house fire. Sorry to get dark. In a normal house fire, 800 degrees centigrade, and what happens is the fingers and the toes are gone, but the bones are left behind, and you can look at the bone and say that was a man, it was a woman, she'd had babies, she'd not had babies, all that sort of stuff. In spontaneous human combustion, it's the other way around. The centre bones go into ash, and all you're left with is the bones on the end. And I think it might be due to, if there's any physiology students here, incomplete phosphorylation of oxidative phosphorylation, incomplete. Yeah, okay, we'll talk about that later. But so you set off your brown fat. So getting back to the bones again, the bones are a real indicator of where we've been. We can see the difference in history between healthy people and sick people who have died of various diseases. We can see the osteoporosis, we can see all sorts of things. So bones are a real indicator. But then from the cartoony point of view, we have the phrase of, digging for the truth, digging for bones. And we have in this fine book, which I advise you all to get, it's called Behind the Lines, The Year in Political Cartoons. And I do believe the winner is here with us. Can you give us a bit of are we allowed to say that? Hello, that's Kathy Wilcox, famous for being the author of Enzo the Wonder Fish. A great book, I love it. Anyway, so there's a wonderful line here by Peter Doherty, the Nobel Prize winner and Australian of the Year. And he says, and I quote, scientists, here we go, no, that was a different person going back to Peter Doherty. Yes, scientists do their best to tell the truth. And that's what also characterises great journalists, great editors, and great cartoonists like Kathy Wilcox and all of her political colleagues around the countryside. And there's all this press release, and depending on what newspaper you read, they put their slant on it, and you read the political cartoon, you say, that's what it's all about. In one issue, they've taken you to the truth. They've dug up the bones, they've found the truth hidden underground. Big it up for political cartoonists. Without them, I'd feel that the world was a much lesser place.
Yeah, so many links between artists and scientists. Can I ask one more question? And if anybody else has a burning question to ask, please come up to the microphone.
Microphone here and,
and
one over there.
And over there. One of the, I guess, enduring images of this year is those from earlier in the year, that day after day of the blackened trees, the exhausted firefighters, and those really poignant images of the wildlife, particularly the koalas. And there are so many of the cartoonists that have depicted those images in such poignant ways. And then when I was looking into it, some of the stats were just incredible. 12.6 million hectares are burned in the bushfires, 20% of Australia's forests, and over 1 billion animals killed. It just makes us wonder, how long will it take for the bush to regenerate to back where it was? In fact, will that ever happen?
It's a hard one. 20% of all Australian forests have burned, and if you go through them, you can see in some cases they've gone to nothing, but in some cases the trees are so desperate to get back to life as we head from then into spring and into summer, that rather than going to the trouble of growing a branch and then leaves, because the leaves are their little solar panels that do the photosynthesis, they don't have enough energy left to do that, and all they can do is grow leaves out of the actual tree trunk. And that's enough to keep them going into the next year. So the vegetation we have, the trees today, our first answer, stay there, we love you to pieces. Our first question, the trees today in Australia are to a large degree the product of evolution directed by the Indigenous people over the last, pick either 60,000 years or 120,000 years, it's at least 60. And during the majority of the time that they were in Australia, there was an ice age. So the ice was 3 kilometres thick over New York, over Montreal, 1 kilometre thick over New York and Germany, ice up and down the Great Dividing Range, which is sort of like an average dividing range, and the water levels around the world to make all this ice drop by 70 metres. So they controlled the vegetation then and kept on controlling it by their, and we're all familiar with to a very small degree, how they did the burning, which was low intensity frequency burning. And so to one degree, we've got the trees such as eucalypts, which are really volatile. They're quite dangerous if you let the undergrowth build up and you do just one big burn. But if you do little burns all the time, you get something different. So what we've had is millennia of controlled burning. And this whole country was just like a giant park for them, which they controlled, that this would have this sort of tree and this would have that, and it all suited the vegetation. And then suddenly the big fires came through. Some parts will come back, some parts will come back differently, some parts won't come back. It's a real mess. We've not done very well with looking after the country, I'm sorry to say.
No. I learned a lot about that sort of fire stick farming, as it was called during my archaeology times, but this is unprecedented, as you say. But we do have a question. Great.
We love you. Question number 1. So speak loud into the microphone. You can do the twirly thing at the bottom and bring the microphone up higher. See, lower down, there's a rotatory thing halfway down the body of the pole.
I'll just bend over.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So we've heard that some domestic animals, like dogs and cats, can catch COVID-19. So the question is, does living with a domestic animal make us more likely to get sick or less likely? Because they can catch other diseases as well, and many of our diseases come from animals. So are we better off without them, or are we better off living with them to protect ourselves?
Complicated one, because you've got the whole social aspect of animals being good for your physical, for your emotional health, and they give you, unless they're a cat, totally open, unrequited love.
I have cats. That's not.
Yep.
There are times when it's unrequited. Trust me.
The cats are good, especially when you can tickle them under the neck or behind the ears, and then you can control them for a little while. But have they controlled you into giving them a good time? I don't know. It's so hard. So they give you also the opportunity to go out and do exercise, which is an important part, and they make you come out of the house. Then you can get diseases from animals. They're called zoonoses, as everybody is beginning to learn now. ZOONOSES. These diseases generally come if they're actually sort of licking your face and so forth, or if they lick your place and you don't wash them properly afterwards. The number of diseases that you get from animals is pretty small, and like if you got a whole bunch of pigeons, you might get pigeon fancier's lung. I learned that from Doc Martin. So in general, what would you do, Edwina? I'm kind of leaning to keep the animals, but do a bit of social distancing, like don't let them lick you too much, or if they do lick you, just wash your hands afterwards.
I would definitely advocate for living with animals, but I think there's also a question about humans encroaching on habitat as well, in terms of, some of the wild animals and those sort of interfaces between diseases that humans can get as a result of habitat loss.
A remarkably large number of diseases have jumped from creatures in the wild to us, including AIDS and Ebola and all of the influenzas, because birds and pigs are really good reservoirs for them, and we're very confident that COVID-19 jumped across to us as well. So your point about us encroaching upon the habitats of these animals and then causing these diseases that affect us is absolutely 100% correct, Dr. Edwina. Does that kind of answer your question? You got a follow-up question?
No, I think that kind of answers it. I think that even if we could get very sick from them, I think it's worth it.
Next question.
Do we have another question?
No. Shy person? No. Oh, okay. Well, one out of the emergency pile there, yes.
I think we've got time for one more. Well, I'm going to ask it. And that is, after the bushfires here at Old Parliament House and in Canberra, we just went through this enormous hailstorm. And as someone who looks after this building, it was quite devastating for me to see so much damage of this heritage property, but also the properties in Canberra. And I guess in this year where we're asking, are there links between the incredible events that we've had this year? Was that hailstorm as a result of the bushfires and the smoke and any other sort of atmospheric issues that might have been going on at that time?
What was the time delay, Dr. Edwina?
It was almost a month, it was in weeks, like barely had the sort of smoke cleared, and then this hailstorm on the 20th of January.
Okay, firstly, I'm not an expert in anything. A meteorologist would know more about this than I would, but let me start on a pathway involving two fancy words: nucleation centres, right? And so if you're sanding some wood with very fine grinding paper, not 100 grade, but 2000, and you're creating this very fine dust in the air, if you, on a hot day, breathe out into this cloud of fine dust, which you can't even see, suddenly you'll see your own water droplets in the air. So these very fine particles, so you can see where we're heading with the dust from the bushfires, the very fine particles can set off a change of state from between the solid and the liquid and the gas, and here we're talking between the liquid and the gas phase of water droplets in the air. Second example, you get some water and you try to make instant coffee by firstly nuking the water in the microwave oven. Now, if you boil water, it's really well mixed. Comes up, around, up, around, up, around, and it's all at 100 degrees centigrade. But if you nuke it in the microwave, there are hot spots every 10 centimetres apart. And so you might find that the top is, say, at 95 degrees centigrade, and underneath, deeper down in the cup, is some water at 101 degrees centigrade that wants to turn into steam, but it can't do it because of the weight of the liquid above it. You then tip in the instant coffee or the tea bag, which has got a fine powder with it as well, and when the nucleation centre hits the liquid or the gas at the right temperature, it'll make it change state, and then the water changes from liquid water at 100 degrees centigrade into steam at 100 degrees centigrade, expands in volume by 1,700 times, and suddenly the innocent person trying to have a tea bag tea or instant coffee has a face full of boiling water, and this happens maybe 4 or 5 times every year in Australia. Going back to the bushfires, now you've got the background. I'm willing to bet that there were incredible numbers of very fine particles. And adding in that time delay, if you've got a little bit of a wind that happens with the storm, it can bring them into the atmosphere, and you've got the water droplets in the air or the fine particles wanting to coalesce, and they need a little block of something, a little nucleation centre. Then you get it turning into a raindrop. You then need a bit of a storm. So you have the uprising air, and then this water droplet, once it's formed, is then pushed up to high altitude by the wind and then freezes. And then the wind drops off, the wind goes this way and that, it falls down, picks up another water droplet, it then gets pushed up and it freezes. So you end up with the hailstone growing layer by layer. And if you chop them with a fine blade, you can see the individual layers like an onion thing. And so it goes up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, until finally it gets so heavy that it can overcome the force of the wind. And suddenly you've got hailstones. How big were your hailstones here? Like a cricket ball? Oh. Wow. Because for a brief while, wasn't this very place that we're in the most polluted city on the planet Earth? And I've asked people and they've been telling me you couldn't see 50 metres, you needed your headlights in the middle of the day. So there'd be so much fire and dust. Anyway, that's my hypothesis or guess.
Yeah.
There could be a link, very well be.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Karl, for bringing your science to what seems like such a crazy year, and to the everyday, explaining things like instant coffee. So I'm going to hand back to Daryl, but I did just want to say to all audience members, because I know you want to spend a bit more time with Karl whilst he's here. His book, Dr. Karl's Surfing Safari Through Science, is available in our shop, so you can find out more of those fantastic answers to everyday conundrums, and Dr. Karl will be happy to speak to any audience members after the event. So now, back to Daryl. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karl and Edwina. Now we come to the bit that I think most of us are waiting for, which is the Political Cartoonist of the Year. And it was a particularly difficult year for us to make a selection, because how can you choose a single cartoonist from the outstanding body of work that has been on offer this year? Well, this is Canberra, so we pulled together a committee. No, not really. We had a panel of judges. And I'd like to acknowledge them because they brought a wonderful insight to this. Nobel laureate Professor Peter Doherty, Professor Richard Scully of the University of New England, Lindsay Foyle, Honorary Historian for the Australian Cartoonist Association, Marcus Hughes, Director of Indigenous Engagement at the National Library of Australia, Holly Williams, our Curator for Behind the Lines 2020, and Annette Luchard-Fletcher, who heads our content and exhibitions here at MoAD. It was a tough decision with a number of brilliant candidates, but I am delighted to announce that this year's Political Cartoonist of the Year is the outstanding Kathy Wilcox, cartoonist for the Sydney... I'll introduce her in a second, 1 second. She is... Come on, 1 minute. Come and stand here, I'll just finish it. It's an amazing honour to be sharing the stage with Kathy, but I will just say she's the cartoonist for the Sydney Morning Herald and the Melbourne Age, and she won the award for the sharp eye she casts on both sides of politics, the way she captured momentous events of the year, especially as seen through the eyes of ordinary Australians. She continues to prick and provoke with her take on events, big and small, often with a poignant take on the key events of the year, such as summer's bushfire, wildlife disasters, and COVID-19. We are deeply honoured to be offering this to Kathy. It is the second year she's won it, and in honour of, to recognise this, the Political Cartoonist of the Year, Dog's Breakfast, Kathy Wilcox. Yes, okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Dr. Karl. Thank you, Wally, who welcomed us to this land. Thanks, Edwina. Holly Williams, the curator. Greg Parrish, the exhibition coordinator and cartoonist wrangler. Thanks Chris Starr and the creative team who dreamed up this year's dream theme. How did you know that commissioning me with a bunch of dog-themed drawings was the best way to guarantee my 100% cooperation? And thank you to the judges, who I only found out who they were just now. I didn't have to pay anyone, it was amazing. I'm honoured, really chuffed to be recognised in this way by MoAD, because the feeling is frankly mutual. They really are, to me, the best Australian democracy-themed institution dedicated to the preservation of the institution of Australian democracy. Try and say that twice, fast. And not all institutions are worthy of such praise. Hell no. I can think of quite a few institutions, political, legal, religious, military, which have been far from admirable in recent time, even if they provide fertile ground from the point of view of the cartoonist. Also fertile ground, as you will see in this exhibition, has been the nightmare of the year that is not quite over. Fires, floods, corruption and COVID, toxic tweeters and culture clashes, a dog's breakfast indeed, have provided endless inspiration for those of us lucky enough to be published while the legacy press navigates the internet. I'm eternally grateful too for editors like Lisa Davies of the Sydney Morning Herald and Gay Alcorn at The Age, who champion my work and trust me to say what I think needs saying. I'm sure my cartooning colleagues would agree that we've worked particularly hard this year, as there have been no slow news days to speak of. But back to this institution. Now, while the idea of democracy inhabiting a museum might suggest its recent demise, what this place does is remind us what democracy looks like, thus giving us a better chance of keeping it alive. One key indicator, or key KPI, Greg, of democracy is the freedom of its citizens to criticise the powerful. If you want to gauge that freedom, look no further than at the cartoons. In some countries, you might find not many, as the cartoonists will have sensed which way the wind was blowing and disappeared, or been arrested, or imprisoned, or erased somehow already. In other countries, like France, the struggle between the freedom to criticise and repression by an offended extremist group becomes a life and death matter. And yet, surrendering to threats of violence is not an option in a country for which free speech is a fundamentally held value. I'm fortunate in this country that the worst I receive really is the occasional, "Dear Mr. Wilcox, regarding your sketch on the 4th of last month, I found it to be deeply offensive and indicative of society's ultimate moral decline, etc. My sympathies to your wife," and so on. So, how is our democracy? We've been watching the ABC come under pressure from the enforcement branch of the government, cheered on by a murderocratic chorus. And creeping laws restrict our access to information regarding government undertakings while demanding ever greater access to our own, often in the name of national security. That a democracy remains strong is by no means a given. Just look at the US. Thank goodness MoAD persists in gathering an annual showcase of political cartoons, even if they sometimes find it hard to fulfil the government-mandated quota of balance. We remind them every year that the thing about cartoons is they prick the powerful. So you might find poor people irritatingly demanding sometimes, but consider that they might not be so demanding if they weren't poor. Anyway, where was I? Thank you to the Museum of Australian Democracy. They elevate our daily ephemeral musings to the level of enduring art and make of us a valued part of this country's socio-political discourse. It's my pleasure to open this year's Behind the Lines exhibition. It's a thrill to be named Cartoonist of the Year, but really it's just an honour to have my work featured alongside that of my most excellent cartoon colleagues in this Dog's Breakfast of a Year 2020. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Putting together Behind the Lines for this Dog's Breakfast of a Year could not have been possible without the passion, commitment and creativity of all of the members of the Behind the Lines project team who spent many hours riffing, or should I say roughing, on their dog theme, considering the safety requirements of COVID and adding their creativity to this, our most popular exhibition. Our staff are our secret weapon, and Behind the Lines is an example of the way that every team across the organisation pulls together seamlessly. I would particularly like to acknowledge Nanette Luchard-Fletcher and Holly Williams, Katrina Power, Greg Parrish, Sarah Murray, Campbell Rhodes, Melissa Holcraft, and Joel Bliss and Ben Radcliffe. I've got a typo in here, so apologies, for their whoosh machine, and that's still to come. And of course, our outstanding 36 cartoonists. This is a testament to you all. About the whoosh machine, I'd like to invite you to join us downstairs for the inaugural ball drop, and it has nothing to do with the elections, at the whoosh machine, which Kathy will be initiating, and follow it up with a viewing of the exhibition. Thank you all for being part of this extraordinary experience of 2020 and for joining us today at Behind the Lines. I hope it's a better year next year.